Welcome back to another episode of Colorado Politicking. I'm Pat Poblete, your host. And you know, you're really getting into the legislative session when we start talking about the budgets and the agency budgets. And that can normally be a really, really dry discussion. But I've got a couple friends with me today that I hope can liven it up a little bit. And we're going to start off with the Judicial Department and bring in judicial reporter Michael Karlik. Michael, you wrote a story earlier this week, kind of looking at and unpacking some of the things that various judicial agencies were looking for out of the state budget. I want you to elaborate on that a little bit. Kind of tell us what it is that the courts in this state really need.
Sure. Several judicial agencies and related departments appeared before the House and Senate Judiciary Committees to talk about where they've been over the past year, what their priorities are, and most importantly, what they need. And starting with that is the Judicial Department itself, the court system, from the Supreme Court all the way down to the trial courts, and also the probation department. The Chief Justice and the State Court Administrator appeared to talk about the effect the pandemic has had on the department, the fact that we're still not at our pre-COVID level of jury trials, but he mentioned that there are about 1,000 hours of video conferencing happening every day in the state. That's everything from trial court hearings to oral arguments to probationary meetings. Now, what the Judicial Department needs is better IT infrastructure, some more pay for the entry-level judicial employees, and also a constitutional amendment to help address the new judicial district in the Denver suburbs that's going to be coming online in 2025. Now, related to that, the Judicial Discipline Commission also appeared to talk about their proposal for an independent funding stream for their operations. Currently, they depend on the Supreme Court for their money, but that's a bit of an odd situation because, of course, the Judicial Discipline Commission investigates the judiciary. So they're asking for the legislature to separate them from the court system. And that is something that Chief Justice Brian Boatwright said that he supports. Now, moving on, the Attorney General's office appeared to talk about Attorney General Phil Weiser's priorities. Those included combating fentanyl and other drug distribution and overdose deaths in the state. He also talked about needing to provide mental health supports and trauma supports for police officers, and a bunch of Republicans on the joint House and Senate Judiciary Committees had some questions to him about how quickly and effectively he's addressing the opioid epidemic. Now, moving on, the Public Defender's Office came in. They are needing better IT resources and also more paralegals. And Pat, those things are interrelated. As Public Defender Megan Ring described, cases are becoming more complex now. There's more information from police body cam footage, dash camera footage, cell phone content, and that's a lot for her attorneys to sift through. And so the paralegals will help because they are, paid less than a lawyer. They will help those lawyers sort through some of the intake materials, and the IT upgrades will help store that material and process that material. Now, finally, I want to mention the Access to Justice Commission, which as its name implies, helps people access with fewer or lower barriers the civil justice system in the state, everything from evictions to child custody. And Justice Melissa Hart and the executive director of the Access to Justice Commission held about 41 virtual meetings across the state last year, mostly in rural areas, where they heard about all kinds of difficulties that people have accessing the court system, from flat out unreliable internet use to not accessible for people with disabilities, to English-only forms and processes that maybe an adult litigant can't comprehend. So they maybe need to turn to their young son or daughter to translate some of those forms. The Access to Justice Commission didn't have any concrete policy proposals this year because it was their first time appearing before the House and Senate Judiciary Committees, but they got encouragement from members to come back next year and keep people updated on the kind of work they're doing, Pat.
Believe it or not, that was a very high-level overview of all of the things that various judicial departments around the state wanted. If you want to see more of Michael Karlik's reporting, and there is quite a bit more flushing out everything that he just said, there should be a link just below you if you're watching on Colorado Politics. But from the judicial system, let's go to what happens when people are found guilty, and that is the state correction system. And Chief Legislative Reporter Marianne Goodland is in the House to talk a little bit about this and unpack what it is corrections is looking for. Marianne, I'm going to kick it over to you. What is it the prisons want?
Well, the Department of Corrections operates a number of prisons throughout the state, but they also have two private prisons, and they're both in very rural portions of southeastern Colorado. You have the Crowley County Correctional Facility in Crowley County, and then you have the Bent County facility in Bent County. Both of them are operated by a company called Core Civic. They are the last two private prisons in the state. Now, the Democrats, including Governor Jared Polis, have had it in their heads that they want to close the private prisons. Although a study that came out in 2021 said that that really isn't feasible because it would be economically devastating to those counties. Both of them are heavily reliant on the property taxes that they get from those two prisons. But the prisons have got a much bigger these two prisons have a much bigger problem than right now than the governor wanting to close them down, and that is turnover. The request that came from the Department of Corrections was to increase what's known as the per diem, and that's what the prisons are paid daily for each prisoner. And they wanted to ask for a boost to raise the starting pay to about $22 an hour. Right now, they're paid about $18 an hour. That's substantially lower than what state correctional officers are paid, which is about $24 an hour. And the Department of Corrections, when asked what was the need for this, pointed to a turnover rate in both prisons of more than 100% per year, which means that they're turning over officers faster than they can keep them on the job, and that becomes a public safety issue. It's also a big problem for the management of the inmates, and both prisons have had more than 1,000 inmates each that have come down with COVID, so they need reliable staffing. What was interesting about this was the support for this from Leslie Herod, Representative Leslie Herod of the Joint Budget Committee, who has been one of the strongest advocates in the General Assembly for closing down private prisons, but she was very clear that while she may be wanting to close them down, she does support paying these correctional officers a living wage.
Thank you, Marianne, for that reporting. I was very curious myself as to what Leslie Herod would do on this issue. As you said, she has been very outspoken on prisons in the past and is also a key member of the Joint Budget Committee. So her input on this was obviously very, very important. So very good to hear from Marianne. If you want to see her reporting, just like Michael's, it should be just below us if you're watching on coloradopolitics.com. But for Marianne, for Michael, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this week. We will see you again next week.